Hello friends, I came across some really good information. In my opinion, I've made a video about it. We're going to talk about Montenegro's statistics for 2024 compared to 2023. Specifically, we'll be looking at macroeconomic indicators. Why is this interesting? Because we can actually see what Montenegro has achieved, where there have been successes and where there have been failures. So we're talking about whether loans are being given, whether they're given to foreigners, how they're given, growth, decline, who works where, and in which sectors. So is it really true that in Montenegro you can only get a job as a waiter, or is that complete nonsense? That's what I'll be telling you about today, along with much more. So as we can see in the first screenshot, Montenegro's GDP in 2024 was about 7.5 billion euros. In 2024, the growth was 3%. To all the skeptics who have been saying for years how bad the macroeconomic indicators are, you should compare this 3% to other European countries, and you'll see that by local regional standards, Montenegro is almost like China. In the second screenshot, we see the average number of employed people in Montenegro is 257, 390, which is 5.3% higher than it was in 2023. There are 37 unemployed people in the country, which is 17.3% less than in 2023. In reality, the number of unemployed people is actually lower than the statistics show, because these statistics include people who work illegally or simply do not want to work. The main unemployment is concentrated in the north and in some central regions of the country. On the coast, the only person who can't find a job is someone who doesn't want to find one. The average net salary, that is the one paid in hand without taxes, in 2024 was 876 euros. At the same time, it should be noted that since October of last year, there has been another significant increase in salaries in the country, and therefore in 2025, the average salary exceeded 1,000 euros. But for now, we are only talking about 2024, so it should be noted that in 2024, the average salary was 876 euros, which is 10.6% higher than it was in 2023. Third screenshot, the structure of employed people by industry. This screenshot will be interesting for those who say that in Montenegro you can only work as a waiter and can't find any other job. We see that 20% are employed in trade and 10% in accommodation and food services. So here it is, the service sector, trade, accommodation and food services. That makes up 30% of the workforce. Next, 9% are government officials, 8% are in construction, 7% in education, 6% are scientists, engineers and similar professions, and 6% are in industry. Well, yes, there isn't much industry in Montenegro, but there is some, at least mainly is the manufacturing industry, the gas supply industry, and steam supply. What else? Energy. And there is also a manufacturing industry that exists as well. 6% are in healthcare, 5% in transport and logistics, and 5% in various services. Well, I guess I fall into this 5% category. 4% are in information and communication, 3% in creativity and entertainment, and 11% in some other fields. So guys, for everyone who says that in Montenegro you can only find work in the service sector, take another look at these numbers. About 30% of the population is employed in the service sector specifically, 20% in trade and 10% in restaurants and hotels. All right. And our fourth screenshot is about manufacturing. In manufacturing, the extraction of mineral resources increased by 8.9%, and there was an 11.9% growth in the processing industry. Gas and electricity supply, on the other hand, saw a decline of 15.1%. The reason isn't specified, but it's logical to assume that it's probably because the winter of 2023-2024, that is, last year's winter a year ago, was the warmest in recent decades. And accordingly, this affected the amount of electricity consumed in Montenegro. In the next screenshot, the increase in imports is higher by 6.8%. Due to the decline in tourist flow, the increase in imports can be explained by the rise in salaries in Montenegro, which was observed throughout the year and was especially strong since October of last year, when another reform aimed at raising wages was implemented. Exports decreased by 8.8%. I did not list the most important partners from which the country imports goods, nor those to which it exports. In principle, if you're interested, you can look at the screenshot, but I do want to mention the export destinations. These are Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Switzerland, and Slovenia. In the next screenshot, we see that domestic trade grew by 11%, which again is a result of rising wages. This is the 7th screenshot. Almost all types of transport showed growth in 2024, except for freight transportation by rail, where a decline is observed. At the same time, passenger transportation by rail also increased, but freight transportation experienced a drop. Apparently, people have started using some other form of transport more. I don't know exactly which one. Maybe highways or perhaps maritime transport. The value of newly built apartments has increased, but the number of apartments in new buildings has decreased by 32%, which is of course a very significant drop. It should be noted that visually, based on personal observations, in 2024 foreigners have become somewhat less enthusiastic about buying real estate in Montenegro. It's not that they've stopped buying it altogether, they are still buying, but it's no longer like before when everything would be snapped up at the foundation stage. This is due to the fact that inflation has slowed down significantly worldwide, and now the question of how to preserve one's money is no longer as pressing as it was in previous years. This was a concern for everyone in previous years because inflation was really raging, and real estate was one of those wild heaven shows, should I put it, sanctuaries where you could hide your money from devaluation. Now that inflation has dropped significantly, there's basically no urgent need to rush out and buy real estate anymore. So in the next screenshot we see the number of tourists has decreased by only 0.2%. So basically, at first glance, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but the total number of booked accommodations has dropped by 4.9%, which is of course quite a significant decline. We can see that the main tourists are 18% from Serbia, 8% from Bosnia, 8% from Russia, 7% from Turkey, 6% from Germany, and 53% came from various other countries. Notice that although Russians make up only 8% of all tourists, which is about 3 times less than before Russia introduced counter-sanctions, which hit Montenegro very hard, these very Russians booked as much as 18% of all overnight stays. Well, as we can see looking at the screenshots, I think by now no one has any doubts as to why Russians are so important for the local tourism market and why European tourists haven't been able to fully replace them. They simply book a significant number of overnight stays. In the next screenshot, we see that foreign investments have increased. The largest amounts of money were brought into the country by citizens of Serbia, Russia, Turkey, and Germany. But the investments were mainly specifically 51% of them spent on purchasing real estate. Right now, this is being discussed in the news, how beneficial this actually is for Montenegro, since in principle, it mostly leads to the enrichment of private individuals rather than the development of the country. In my opinion, this is of course nonsense, because the personal growth in the wealth of individual citizens, even if they are entrepreneurs who build and sell apartments, ultimately still leads to the development of the country. These citizens hire construction workers who spend money, import building materials into the country and pay customs duties, sell real estate, pay taxes, and so on. In other words, to put it simply, of course, buying real estate like any other activity is important for Montenegro. That's it. So in the next slide, we see that the banking sector in Montenegro is stable. The growth of bank assets is the same as the growth of liabilities. In other words, there has been no imbalance. Important. This will be interesting to many of you. There is a noted increase in lending. And what's even more interesting, a common question is, can a foreigner get a loan in Montenegro? In this slide, you can see that loans are given to non-residents. Moreover, in 2024, the volume of loans taken by them increased by 18%. It should be noted here that I don't know exactly who was counted as a non-resident in these statistics. According to the law on personal income tax, a resident is a person who lives in Montenegro for more than 365 days. However, banks have a different definition of residents and non-residents, which does not correspond to this law. That's why I don't know what exactly was included in these statistics. I don't know this, it's not specified here. Perhaps they included people according to the law, who, for example, obtained a residence permit but have only recently arrived. But most likely the central bank most likely took the statistics from the banks, according to which a resident is considered to be someone who has already lived in Montenegro for several years. So, again, I can't say for sure, but most likely these are not people who literally just arrived yesterday. However, nevertheless, even though it's unclear here exactly whom they are calling a non-resident, it's clear that they're talking about foreigners who do not have permanent residency or Montenegrin citizenship. That's the video. I hope it was interesting and useful. Friends, if you have questions about immigration or about accounting services for businesses, you can contact me. All my contact information is in the description of this video. Goodbye, everyone.